That's the power of intention and frequency, which is why we're here tonight. So it gives me the great pleasure to welcome to the stage, direct from Amsterdam, Mr. Jason Silva.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Well, good evening, everybody. How's everyone doing tonight? Gotta say, Jimmy, a spectacular event. Really, I have found it so inspiring and so stimulating to speculate and explore the ways in which sound and music can crack us open, because that's how the light gets in, right? So a little bit about me. My name is Jason Silva, and I've spent the last decade traveling the world and speaking about technology and creativity and innovation and the future of humanity. I'm very much a dreamer and an optimist, and really my career took off because of these videos that I used to make about our sort of technological science fiction utopian future. And my passion for technology really was born out of this idea that through technology, we were able to transcend our limitations. Through technology, we were able to overcome all the ways in which we were bounded and in which we were finite. I mean, it really began for me as an adolescent having an existential crisis about mortality. I read a book called The Denial of Death, a book by Ernest Becker, Pulitzer Prize-winning book I highly recommend, that basically said that the worm at the core of the human condition, the thing that makes us anxious, the faint disquiet, is our unique awareness of our mortality. In the words of Sheldon Solomon, the explicit awareness that you're a breathing piece of defecating meat destined to die and ultimately no more significant than a lizard or a potato is not especially uplifting. And so, I read this book, The Denial of Death. I remember another line from the book that I want to share with you. He says that the idea of the human animal is that to have emerged from nothing, to have come from nothing, to have a name, to have consciousness of self, to have deep inner meaning and excruciating inner yearning for life and self-expression, and with all this, yet to die. I mean, this was the primary idea, was that the source of our unease and our dis-ease was that we had this boundless symbolic inner life, but then we were bounded by this finite, aging, decaying body, this heart-pumping, breath-gasping, decaying body. So we were sort of simultaneously gods and worms all at once. And so for me, discovering technology was a pathway to transcendence. The technology was a pathway to salvation. I became a kind of follower of the techno-religion known as the singularity, and this idea that through technology we would overcome human limitations of all sorts. And in many ways, we have triumphed. One of the most interesting things about technology is that it seems to progress at an exponential rate, which is sort of counterintuitive because we tend to think about change in a linear rate, but technology changes exponentially. The smartphone that you have in your pocket today is 1,000,000 times cheaper, 1,000,000 times smaller, and 1,000 times more powerful than what used to be a $60 million supercomputer that was half a building in size 40 years ago. I mean, that's the kind of astounding technological progress that we've been privy to. We have this unique capacity to shrink the lag time between what we can imagine and what we can create. The psychedelic philosopher Terence McKenna, he calls us the coral reef-like animal, the extruder of technological material. That we take in matter of low organization, we put it through the filters of the human mind, and we extrude space shuttles and iPhones. And so for me, this was it. This was the pathway to salvation. We've doubled the human lifespan. We're getting more advanced medicine every day. We're doing technologically mediated telepathy. We can communicate across time and space. space. Geography has collapsed. I mean, we are building this world shaped by imagination, powered by technology, and the sky's the limit. Except it's not. So the last 10 years have been, for me, this techno-utopianism, this marveling at our astounding capacity for progress, exponential technologies, and fully realizing our imagination. Except what I've come to realize increasingly, in the words of Edward O. Wilson, is that no matter how godlike our technologies are, we still have Paleolithic brains, and we still have medieval laws. And so we lack the systems and we lack the wisdom to deploy these technologies in order to address the grand challenges of humanity. Right? We've never had such abundance, right? We fly airplanes across the sky. We share our thoughts and ideas across the planet. We have cognitized the world, electrified the world. I mean, we are as gods. If our ancestors could look at us, they'd think we are gods. And yet, simultaneously, we're living through a crisis of alienation, a mental health crisis that is putting us on our knees. According to the World Health Organization, more people die by suicide now than from natural disasters and armed conflict combined. And so, even though we have iPhones and airplanes that fly, and we're about to go back to the moon, even though we have all of this, we are suffering from these diseases of despair, these diseases of alienation, these diseases of ruminations. We've become our own worst enemy. These self-defeating thought patterns that have infected us have made us blind to our genius and blind to our own capacity to transcend any and all of our limitations. And so we're living in the best of all possible worlds and in the worst of all possible worlds. And so after a decade, especially speaking to corporate audiences about exponential technologies, I feel like we need to also talk about these two other things that aren't being addressed with the ferocity that they need to be addressed, which is, again, we have Paleolithic brains, we have medieval laws, and then we have these godlike technologies. And so it has sent me on a kind of journey into the world of psychedelic healing and transformation, and that's why I call these remarks, this era that I believe we should be heading into, the cyberdelic age, an age of virtual realities and programmable biologies and psychoactive technologies. And so what interests me is, how do we use all of these three tracks, these three things? How do we use virtual reality and digital technology? And how do we use biohacking and programmable biology? And how do we use psychoactive technologies to really engage the technical material of human subjectivity itself, as Eric Davis has written? How do we get in there and rewrite the OS, rewrite the inner narrative? How do we move past our fractures, and how do we render ourselves whole? And then, as Jamie Wheel said, maybe even render ourselves holy. So I have a couple of videos that I want to show you today that try to map some of these ideas as I've explored them through my work. And so the first video is about the nature of trauma, the nature of as they say, the body keeps the score, and how experiences that we have in our lives, they really kind of our cells are a technology that turns experience into biology. And so how trauma lives in the body, and how PTSD can only really be resolved through its inverse PTSD. So it's about the intensity of the intervention that is needed to heal the places in which we are fractured. So if you could play the first video, please.
Life throws you punches, and disjointment follows. The fractures of trauma are such that we experience a schism, and we become frightened even of ourselves. We're no longer safe in our own bodies. And what this does is it casts a shadow upon our experience of the world. We bring this trauma to the doorstep of every moment. And so we become afraid. The world becomes hostile. And this dark cloud of trauma that kind of colors our windshield becomes our interpretive framework. It becomes our lens of perception. And as Chris Letheby wrote, we see through our lenses and we see with our lenses, but we don't see the lenses themselves. And so that scary world we're seeing through our lenses is being shaped and informed and colored by that lens. But we don't realize that anymore. We've come to believe that the lens is reality, that the map is the territory. But this corrupted lens and this corrupted map that's been severed and disjointed, that's experienced the schism of trauma, the rape, the transgression, the violation that has brought us into disjointment and discongruence. This is now coloring our world. The body keeps the score. We bring this gnawing anxiety and self-consciousness with us to the doorstep of every moment. It's temporal dislocation. That's what David Lenson calls it. And in this temporal dislocation, we overdetermine the present moment. We misread the present moment. And so we're walking on eggshells unnecessarily, a victim of our own self-defeating projections. And we need to break through this. We need to break past this to come back into wholeness. And so that map of the world, that lens of perception has to die. We have to have an experience that is akin to inverse PTSD, right? An experience that is as intense as the trauma was, but it's inverse. And so what that does is it bumps us up a level. And now we can see the lenses that we see through and with. We can actually see the lenses themselves. And once we see the lenses, we can dispense with those lenses. And that means we become twice born. And now we meet the world not with fear, perhaps, but with curiosity and grace and equanimity. Something has shifted from the inside out, and then everything changes, right? And so that's what we're all after, that kind of healing, that kind of reconciling from disjointment, a coming into congruence, a coming into integrity, a coming into acceptance, and a coming into wholeness. We need to integrate all of us and come back into that place. We need to reconcile. We need positive catharsis.
So, you know, one of the things that I was talking about in that video was a theory put out by a guy called Chris Letheby. I really recommend you look up his work. He talks about the difference between knowledge by description and knowledge by acquaintance. You know, when a person is in the midst of a mental health crisis, when they're in the pits of despair or anxiety or rumination, you know, they're crushing depression, they can't get out of bed. There's a failure of the imagination, according to Kierkegaard, where the person can't actually imagine a world outside of their distress. They can't literally summon a vision of what it's like not to be depressed. So let's say they're in this shitty life situation, there's no way out. You can't just talk them through a new possibility. You can't tell them what it's like to go into waterfalls in Iceland. You know, like you have to go there to know there. And what seems to be so powerful about using psychedelics, and probably combined in the right setting with the right music, is that it gives people this experience of knowledge by acquaintance. They become directly acquainted with the felt reality of direct experience. It puts them there. It gives them another place to plant their feet. It's this idea of bumping up a level that he talks about, right? And so these interpretive frameworks, these lenses of perception that you see through and you see with, now you can see the lenses. It's like that metacognition that the previous speaker was talking about. And from that place, there can be real transformation and real intervention. And often, you know, the other trapping that the previous speaker mentioned is, how do you avoid the spiritual ego? How do you avoid the messiah-like feeling that now you know the answer? Well, a lot of what happens in psychedelic spaces when people are healing, when people are potentially glimpsing wisdom, is these experiences are ineffable, and they seem to be beyond language. Again, you have to go there to know there. But people are creatures of language. They want to be able to like put the experience into a box and say, like, I'm healed because of this. And so there's a tendency to grab what I think is an experience of like poetic truth and literalize it. And I also think that's a mistake. You know, the minute you try to take what is your truth or your poetic truth, your poetry, and turn it into scripture that other people now need to listen to, that's the beginning of spiritual ego. That's the beginning of that trap. And so I've always felt that what happens in psychedelics is about poetry, and it is ineffable. And it really can only be rendered in the language, in the elastic language of poetry. And that's what this next video is about. It sort of gives a little bit of a taste of what a mystical experience is like, what these kinds of interventions, these psychoactive interventions, can do to our psyches. And it's inspired by the ideas of Otto Rank in his book called The Idea of the Holy. So what happens when we see the holy, and how do we experience the holy grounded in ourselves in a kind of poetic truth that doesn't turn us into spiritual egotists. Let's play it.
All of a sudden, this recontextualization and this reframing and this beholding of oneself as a conduit in a larger whole from which molecules and meanings flow is to bask in the mystery, is to bask in the mysterium tremendum. Otto Rank, in his book, The Idea of the Holy, wrote about the nature of these religious experiences and these encounters with the mystery that repels and the mystery that attracts, with a kind of sublime encounter with ineffability, with something vaster than we are, but something also far more beautiful and benign and benevolent and omnipotent. And so these dances with starlight, these moments of beholding this larger vastness, this moment of reconciliation and reinterpretation of what we are, is a kind of enlightenment, right? We undergo an enlightenment and an expansion. Once the idea of what we are dies, the birth of what we really are comes into awareness. He who must save his life must first lose it. And I guess we could only hope that more people have these experiences, beholding nature in a deep enough way that a shift transpires that rewires their nervous system, reframes their perspectives, rechannels what they see, revivifies who they think they are, and then in turn changes their actions in the world. May we all rise together into the light and steward our environment, protect our environment, marvel at our environment, worship our environment, and truly come back into the Garden of Eden. And that's the kind of ecodelic consciousness that I'm interested in. May we all wake ourselves up and then steward ourselves and this planet back into the light, for we are starlight, right? Like our atoms were cooked in the furnaces of stars. And so the idea of us coming to see ourselves in this way, seeing ourselves as self-organizing assemblages of atoms cooked in the dying stars, and getting to participate in an evolutionary process of such unfathomable complexity, this teleological, self-organizing, self-writing, self-authoring songstress, this theater, this carnival of engendering complexity that mutates and explodes in every direction, this intelligence explosion, this creative explosion, this explosion of complexity in every direction. We can participate in it as we behold it and as we watch it. We can be in the thralls of it while we are stewards of it all at the same time. We are a way for the cosmos to know itself, and we are a way to sing the songs that orchestrate the universe. And to that end, that's our responsibility, to be the mouthpieces and the stewards of this realization and this revelation, this singularity. And it's a lot of beauty to fathom. It's a lot of beauty to fathom, but that's our responsibility. That's what we're here to do, to be these marvelous these marvelous conduits in a timeless whole. And what a dance, right? To just grab our seat for the game of the millennium, man. What a gift. What a gift. What a gift.
Obviously, I was kind of tripping balls towards the end there. No, but by the way, was the audio of the videos, could you hear it in the back? Was that all right? Yeah. It's interesting though, because again, I use art, and that's visual music. I think film, like music, in the words of Gene Youngblood, reflects humankind's historical drive to manifest our consciousness outside of our mind, in front of our eyes, or within our ears. Music is proof the human race is greater than it knows. Without music, life would be a mistake. Or as Jamie Wheel said, music is the wallpaper of the mind. And so, again, I fell in love with human ingenuity, with our technological proficiency and our technological capacity, because I saw it, and I'm quoting this wonderful book about the Wachowski brothers, the Wachowski sisters now, the directors of The Matrix, when they said that they believe that the imagination can increasingly summon its own literalization. Like that the imagination is summoning its own literalization. That's how I've always seen technology. Or as Ray Kurzweil said, our capacity to imagine, which are virtual realities in our mind's eye, combined with our modest-looking thumbs, was sufficient to usher in this secondary force of evolution called technology, and it will continue until the entire universe is at our fingertips. Like, it's all great, but if we don't get wise, like Stuart Brand said, we are as gods and might as well get good at it. How do we become better gods? How do we become better gods? And that's where I really think that the role of music, the role of film, the role of psychedelics to craft better myths, to give us better encounters with the mysterium tremendum, to recontextualize the self and see ourselves as a marvelous conduit in a timeless whole from which molecules and meanings flow from neurons to nebula and back again. Like, we need to give ourselves that existential reframing so that we can show up and grow up and finally free the brave, reckless gods within us all, as D.H. Lawrence wrote, because that's our potential. I mean, that is our potential. And it's so frustrating to me when I see the petty ways and the petty things that we allow to hold us back. Our neuroticism, our rumination, these diseases of despair, these diseases of meaning. Well, it's like we need better stories to enrich us with deeper meanings. And in some cases, the greatest story is the story of that mind-expanding trip, that psychedelic intervention that finally gets you past your resistances and reframes the world for you and imbues the world with magic once more. Aldous Huxley had this great line in Doors of Perception when he said that when the mescaline kicked in, he was no longer looking at an unusual flower arrangement, but instead he was seeing what Adam had seen on the morning of his creation, the miracle moment by moment of naked existence. And so how do we reframe our minds to meet the world with that virginal noticing? How do we deliberately deploy things like music and intention and the right language, because words aren't just descriptive, they're also generative, to change our very subjectivity and re-enchant the world, right? Because the world is full of magic things patiently waiting for our senses to grow sharper, as Yeats wrote, or Nisargadatta, who said the other world is this world rightly seen. And so in my videos, I'm not just trying to explain this kind of stuff, I'm trying to evoke it. That's what an artist is trying to do with his work, with the right song, with the right music, with the right film. We're trying to evoke an experience in people. We have to, if it's possible, to give people that knowledge by acquaintance. I can't dose you guys all with psychedelics, but I can show you these videos to paint a vision that's inviting you to go, hey, look at here, come with me, and you'll see it's a world of pure imagination, as Willy Wonka said. So this next video is about that. It's about magical realism versus naive realism. And it was inspired by a line from the British philosopher Alain de Botton. Alain de Botton has this great line, and he kind of divides objective truth and subjective truth, kind of like separating church and state. It's a pretty good thing, Or Ursula Le Guin, who says, science describes accurately from the outside, poetry describes accurately from the inside. Science explicates, but poetry implicates. And so what Alain de Botton said, he said a journalist may be more accurate in describing the details of reality than a poet, but a poet may nevertheless reveal truth of a deeper sort beyond the literal grid. And not just a poet, but a musician and a filmmaker and a sound engineer, right? It's about revealing the truth beyond the literal grid, which is just as true, because we're gods and worms. We're both, right? We're eternal, timeless, spiritual beings who are, aging every single day at the same time. So this video is about orienting ourselves around the magic that is right in front of us. Please show the third video.
If you know me, no doubt by now, you are aware that I have a soft spot in my heart for magical realism. For magical realism as a way of being that goes beyond mere naive realism. Naive realism is the transactional realm. It's the quotidian and the everyday. It is the banality and arrogance of the been there's and seen that's of the adult mind. And I have freed myself, friends. I have freed myself from I forgot. I have freed myself from this naive realism because instead, friends, I have figured out the protocols and procedures for booting up a new semiotic universe, for booting up a kind of magical realism, a theater of the absurd, a kind of aesthetic realm that I can dwell in, a waking dream where I create and perceive my world. I am speaking to you about deploying a poetic consciousness, about spraying the world with effervescence, about awakening the lethargy of custom and the film of familiarity and redirecting it instead towards the wonders of existence. I have figured out, friends, how to literally live in a realm of magical realism. I am not exaggerating when I say to you that I know how to italicize perception. I know how to set the world to music. I know how to re-enchant continuously my field of awareness. I literally live in a poem of my own choosing. And this kind of magical realism is akin to turning your life into a work of art, to thinking of your life like a living film. We are living cinema. Time becomes liquid upon this realization that you can enchant and paint the world with mind, that you can author stories, that you can live in a story world of your own making. Magical realism can be more real than mere naive realism in all of its banality. It is like when Alain de Botton talks about the difference between a poet and a journalist, the quotidian and the miraculous. He says a journalist may be more accurate in describing the details of an event than a poet, but a poet may nevertheless reveal truth of a deeper sort, beyond the literal grid. So when I speak about magical realism, I speak about realms beyond the literal grid. Magical realism is beyond the literal grid. It is beyond the naivete of cynics, the naivete of the brooding resignation of fatalists and nihilists. They've missed the plot. They've lost the through line. This naive realism that over-materializes, that over-simplifies, that robs the world of all of its poetry is such poverty and such ignorance, friends, because they are not awake, they are asleep. But those of us that realize that the world is made out of pure imagination can drape the cosmos with story and song, and we can sing the songs that orchestrate the universe, and space and time and mind can collapse into each other as time becomes liquid and we become cinema. We've stopped trying to make art and we have become art. Like samurais or the Karate Kid, we get into position and we cue the song and it all just happens. It all just happens, and we have moved from an ordinary world because the world is full of magic things patiently waiting for our senses to grow sharper. This is what Yeats wrote, or the poet Nisargadatta. The other world, the dream world we long for, is this world rightly seen. Magical realism is simply this world rightly seen. It can be like the film Amélie. We can literally make our lives song. We can become poetry. So if you're feeling cynical, in the throngs of despair, living a life of quiet desperation, drudgering away in unconsciousness in the default setting, in the rat race, in that constant gnawing sense of having had and lost some infinite thing, as David Foster Wallace wrote, know this, friends, the promised land, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, it's all there for the taking. making if you open your eyes and understand the protocols and procedures for booting up magical realism, right? Song is proof that the human race is greater than it knows, right? Cinema is truth 24 times per second. Move beyond naive realism and go into the realm of ecstatic truth, of literature, of poetry, and song. And friends, like the greatest moments of your life that no doubt you've known so well, that first kiss, that moment when somebody moved you to the point of tears, when something somewhere incredible waiting to be known was finally seen, and you were like, more of this. You will know what's possible, and you know what I'm talking about. And so that, friends, is what I want to leave you with. Like, don't brood. Don't dismiss, don't grow old, don't grow cynic, don't lose the faith, don't lose the plot. Friends, don't lose the plot, for the world is full of magic things patiently waiting for our senses to grow sharper, and there's literally a field of possibility, a possibility space at the doorstep of every moment ready to be seized in a kind of ecstatic absolution and deep play and improvisational theater and dance and song and art and truth. The truth that sets us free, the truth from which nothing can dislodge us. Catalepsis, the Greeks call it. This is what is possible. This is magical realism, and this is what we're here to do. It's what we're here to do. It's what we're here to do.
So there you go. I mean, that pretty much sums up the message I want to leave you guys there with, you know? It's just like, why the fuck not, right? I mean, why not, like, just push at the edges? So I guess we're pretty much out of time, right? So... Well, thank you guys for listening. And as we move into this cyberdelic age, let us render our dreams into being, and let us take that imagination and have it summon its own literalization. Thank you guys so much, and thank you, Jimmy.